Glenn, the U.S. government says that, of course, he is basically using all of this as an excuse to deflect attention away from the rape allegations that he faces in Sweden. I want to play a bit of sound for you, and I want to get your reaction to it.
He is making all kinds of wild assertions about us when, in fact, his issue with the government of the United Kingdom has to do with whether he's going to go stand, face justice in Sweden for something that has nothing to do with WikiLeaks. It has to do with charges of sexual misconduct. So he is clearly trying to deflect attention away from the real issue.
Your reaction to that?
So here's the core fact that resolves all of these questions that the most media reports have literally ignored, which is his position is not that he does not want to go to Sweden to face these allegations. His position is the opposite. It's that he wants to go to Sweden, and he wants to go today to face those allegations because he insists that he's innocent. His concern is that if he goes to Sweden, that will then be the instrument the United States will use to secure his extradition to the United States, where he will then be put on trial under espionage statutes for doing basic journalism and face life in prison in a supermax facility in the United States. And the only thing that he's asked for, and that his lawyers have asked for, and that the representatives of the Ecuadorian government have asked for, is some cooperation on the part of the governments of Sweden and Britain to ensure that if he ends up in Sweden, if he goes there voluntarily or is extradited, that he will not then be extradited to the United States. That the Swedish government has the authority and the power to decide not to grant extradition requests if they believe it's being done for political crimes. Those are not cognizable extradition offenses. The Swedish and the British government simply refuse to negotiate in any way or acknowledge what is clearly his well-grounded fear that he will end up in the United States and be persecuted for his journalism. And that's why the Ecuadorian government concluded that he really did face a legitimate threat of political persecution, and why their obligations under their treaties was to grant him asylum. The Swedish and British governments could end the standstill today by simply getting together with his lawyers and working out an arrangement so that everyone is satisfied that when he goes to Sweden, he won't then be sent on to the United States. And if he did that, he'd be on the next plane to Stockholm to face these allegations.
Well, let me ask you about the Swedish government. Assange has said, look, I'll make myself available. You guys can come question me, that sort of thing. And yet they want no part of this. What do you make of that?
Right. Well, what originally triggered so much suspicion was that once he was in England, Sweden's original position was, we simply are investigating these allegations. We haven't yet charged him with the crime, which they have not. All we want to do is first question him to determine whether the investigation should proceed. And he said, fine, I'm happy to answer all of your questions. We can do it by video stream with me in London and you in Stockholm, or you can come in to London and I'll answer questions for as long as you want. The Ecuadorians offered that again. They said, come to our embassy in London and ask him all the questions you want, and then if you decide that you want to charge him, we can talk about that then. They've refused to in any way negotiate any of this, and that has really led to the suspicion, understandably so, that what the real intent is to get him onto Swedish soil so that they then can extradite him onto the United States in a way that Britain would be a lot more constrained in doing. And when you add on to that the fact that they now won't guarantee him, as they could, or even offer assurances that they won't send him on to the United States, there's a genuine concern on the part of first Assange and now the Ecuadorians that this is really about getting him into a prison for the rest of his life in the United States for the crime of journalism.
Okay, well, you're there in Rio. It seems to me that that whole region is really kind of coalesced, and basically they're standing up against the UK and the United States over this. Surprised at that, and what do you think that message is?
Well, I'm not surprised. There has been a long-standing resentment in Latin America and in lots of places around the world at what they perceive to be the imperial mindset of the United States and Britain and its allies, that because they're the more militarily powerful countries and at one point were the economically dominant powers, that they could essentially rule the world by fiat, and that they could simply do things like barge into embassies and take whomever they want, while at the same time insisting on the sanctity of diplomatic protection. And this resentment has bubbled over for a long time, and it's now coming to the fore as Latin America becomes stronger and more economically prosperous, as they bind together in alliances, and as the United States, Great Britain, and its allies become weaker. You're seeing a much greater degree of intolerance to accept these double standards than these countries used to have to swallow with a lot of anger and quiet resentment. And the threats that Britain made implicitly to barge into the embassy is basically one of the most extreme expressions of contempt for the system of international law and the peaceful cooperation and coexistence among countries that we've seen in quite some time. And it's very unsurprising that all of Latin America, that all harbor this resentment to varying degrees, but nonetheless all harbor it, joined together and told Britain that this was completely unacceptable and offensive.
Glenn Greenwald, thanks so much for joining us here on The Heat.
Thank you.